Thanks for joining us here on WHO13.com for a special digital segment. I'm joined by Kara Kelly, who some of you may recognize if you saw our story that aired about the brand new inclusive playground in Carlisle. Kara is one of the big contributors to that and someone who helped get it off the ground and make it a reality. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to dive into a topic that, forewarned, is a little uncomfortable for a lot of people, but we want to talk about it because we think it's important and it's okay to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
All right. The important topic is that of pregnancy and infant loss. This is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. So it's been almost exactly 2 years since you lost your son, Dex.
Yes.
Back us up a little bit to the days and weeks leading up to that.
Yes. So Dex was diagnosed with Down syndrome very early in our pregnancy. And so as my partner and I were preparing for that, we wanted to see kind of medically, there's lots of different factors when you have a child with Down syndrome or really any other chromosomal and abnormality. So we first determined, let's see kind of what health challenges there might be. So we saw several specialists at the University of Iowa for several months just to kind of check to see how everything was going. He was growing beautifully, really no issues. So we got to about 28 weeks and they had signed off and said, we don't think you really need to come here anymore unless you want to, unless you're more comfortable. Our physician is obviously here in Des Moines. We asked, do we need to go someplace that has a NICU to deliver? They said, unless he's early, no, everything should be fine. So I would say we really kind of let our guard down because we had been nervous about lots of different issues that could come up throughout the pregnancy. And I would say I'm also kind of a worrier mother anyway. So yeah, we had kind of like delayed telling people, delayed even sharing with our daughter that she was going to be a big sister. So about 1 week before he passed, I had noticed that his movements had changed. It wasn't as prominent as it had been. And he was kind of a kicker and a mover, and he would roll a lot all the time. And so to me, that was really alarming. And I remember like sitting in this recliner and doing the things that they tell us to do. Have some juice, have some cold water, eat something sugary. I ate like the sugariest brownie of all time. And I said, this is not working. And so I called the doctor the next morning and I said, hey, can we just check him out? Because I feel like something's off. And so I went in for an NST, a non-stress test, which, they just hook you up to some monitors and kind of see how he's going. And he would not move. And heartbeat, fine. He just wouldn't, it didn't matter what we tried to do. He just wasn't having it. So they took me down for an ultrasound. And there's some certain, I think it's called a BPP. It's like a biophysical, I can't remember what the other P is, but it's a test basically to see what he's doing. And they look for practice breathing and they look for movement and they watch the heart rate, things like that. And whatever his score was, I remember it was either a 4 or a 5, but it wasn't enough to admit me. So they talked to our perinatal specialist, and the plan forward was we'll keep monitoring and have more ultrasounds. And the next 2 ultrasounds, he did great. Did all the things that he was supposed to do, and within minutes, there was no challenge. He was doing exactly what he should be doing. And that was, the last one was Friday, October 15th. We had the weekend. I went in for my weekly appointment on that Monday morning at like 8 or 8:30. And I remember being in the room, and there was of course, a poor med student who I can only imagine how traumatized he was by that experience. But he couldn't find the heart rate. And he thought, it's an old Doppler. My doctor came in. She couldn't find it. We went and got an ultrasound, and she said, Kara, I'm sorry. And there are moments that, like, I I could see it, like I'm there right now. And I was just so shocked because we had gone through all of that the week before, and we really thought everything was fine, and it wasn't fine.
And you did all the things that they tell us to do.
We did all the things. And, you know, I think particularly when you're dealing with a loss like that as the mother, you take on a lot of personal blame for that. What did I miss? What did I do? I spent many weeks and months after he passed wondering if I didn't advocate enough for him. Did I not? I remember seeing the day of the first NST, being at the elevator with my doctor, who I adore, I should also say. I don't blame her for any of this. But I remember thinking, should I have said, no, you need to admit me, something's wrong. And I have a wonderful therapist who I've been working with since, and she actually had me set up a meeting with my doctor and walk through everything that happened. And she said, we wouldn't have had medical reason to admit you. I don't think I could have admitted you. And while that doesn't make me feel any better, right, it gives me at least some information, right? But it's certainly something, like, it's constantly with you. What did I do? What could I have done? We just don't know.
Yeah, and likely will be for the rest of your life.
Yes.
I want to pull up an email you wrote to me after we met at the playground and did the interview for that story. And you even wrote, I'm not sure if it's worth saying, but I will anyway. And obviously, I think it's worth saying because we are sitting here. The reason I share our story is that losing a child, particularly to stillbirth, is an incredibly isolating experience. Explain that to people and how it's been to live in that reality for the last 2 years.
So, first I'll say, even as somebody who's now had multiple pregnancies, I don't think I even knew actually how common stillbirth is. I think it's like 1 in 100, every 1 in 175 babies. So it's just something that we don't speak about. I think the other thing is, and I think this can be if you're grieving anybody, people don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And so they're very uncomfortable even speaking to you. So you're alone for a lot of that. And even family members aren't really sure how to react. And we kept the loss to ourselves for a while because I don't think either one of us even knew how to talk about it. But as time went on, people don't know what to say, so they don't say anything. And I will say that is probably the hardest part because it basically ignores the fact that I have another child. And I know it's uncomfortable. It couldn't be any more uncomfortable for me, so I think you'll be okay. And I think there's nothing anybody could say that's going to make me feel any worse, really. I mean, there are things that people say that are completely inappropriate, but for the most part, to say his name, to ask me about him, if anything, that just helps me remember, or it makes him more real to me, which when you never have a chance to take your child home, that becomes important.
Those are a lot of the things that we weren't able to include in the story too. Just the experience immediately afterward, the coming home to a nursery that is not going to be used, all of the milestone things.
Yeah, it's so we got the news on a Monday morning. I had a prior C-section, so we decided to do another C-section. I probably could have done a different delivery. I wasn't sure if I could go through with it, if I'm being perfectly honest. So our surgery wasn't scheduled till the next day. So we came home to the empty room. I knew he's still in my belly. Like, I knew he was gone. And so we immediately shut the door because it was very, the way our house is set up, like we have to walk by our kids' rooms to get to our room. So that was very hard. There wasn't a lot of sleeping, I don't believe, that night. But and then the birthing experience is incredibly bizarre. So I just remember it was quiet in the room. And if you think about, I don't know if you had a C-section, but there's a lot of activity when you're having a baby. And it was silent in there. And that is something, like, I remember even looking at Jason and both of us kind of like giving each other a face, like, this is very odd.
Particularly because you've had
Yes,
a child.
because we've had
You've
a child.
been through this before.
And so even I remember our doctor like lifting him up and being like, he's so beautiful, but to not hear him, sorry, like that is a very surreal experience. But we had an unbelievable care team. We were at the hospital for about 24 hours, which is short for a C-section.
Yeah.
And I think that was intentional also, so that we wouldn't have to be there and hear others and things like that. So there was a lot of thought into how we were taken care of, and I will always be very appreciative of that because our nurse helped us with talking, finding a funeral home and thinking about pictures. Yeah. I mean, sometimes people will schedule a photographer. I didn't know what that would, I couldn't make that decision on my own. And so she helped us and took photos of us and did all of that. She, we were still under COVID regulations. She helped it so that my parents and my sister could bring my daughter up, things like that. So there are members of my family who got to see him. We were the first family to use a cuddle cot, which there's a local family who had a similar situation, but their son passed after he was born, and it keeps the body cool so that you can stay with your child longer. And we're very grateful for that because we got time that not everybody gets. To walk out of the hospital with just a box instead of a baby is, again, traumatic. To come home and to the empty room. It took 6 months, I think, for me to open the door to the nursery. And we're still not really sure what to do with that room, to be perfectly honest with you. And I've actually moved a desk in there. I use it as my home office, but there's his little dinosaur rug is still there. Like, I'm not going to get rid of that. But yeah, those things that you just kind of take for granted, they'll sneak up on you fast, and then all of a sudden you can't believe you're experiencing these things.
Yeah, it does. You use the word surreal, and sometimes I feel like we overuse that word, but it is one of those things where you're almost like, is this really my life? Did I go through this? Am I going through this?
Yeah, I would say there's been multiple moments over the last 2 years that have been like that. I mean, so his birthday was last Thursday. I went and sat at his gravesite for his birthday. That's not, what you would want to do. Like, I can think of I can remember very clearly what we did for Mary Grace's second birthday. We had a Minnie Mouse themed party. You know what I mean? Like, I know exactly. But that was my option. So those things I'll live with them my whole life, but they're always there.
So another thing from your email that I wanted to make sure and touch on, and that is babies with Down syndrome having a higher percentage of probability of stillbirth. And you talked about this, what felt like, I'm sure, almost constant monitoring in the very early stages of your pregnancy, knowing that he had Down syndrome, but even with all of that, not knowing that there was this higher probability of stillbirth.
Yeah, so I think I will say this. So we don't know a lot about stillbirth, which is one of the reasons why there is a push for more funding for research. And we're lucky enough or fortunate enough to live in a community that has Healthy Birthday and the women that took their grief and channeled that into the Count the Kicks program. But overall, especially in the U.S., our stillbirth rates are very, very high. And there's a lot of different factors for that. Some of them are socioeconomic, some of those are racial, some of those are just with, comfort and quality of care, right? So when you have a child with a genetic or a chromosomal issue or anomaly, there's always going to be a higher probability that there could be an issue. We have no idea if that's what happened to Dex. We opted not to do an autopsy, which I still struggle with, but I know at the time I was placing so much blame on myself that my partner said, I don't think we should do this because I think that you're going to punish yourself with what you find out, no matter what. And I think he was really concerned for my mental health. And so I appreciate that sentiment. But, when there are issues, and babies with Down syndrome also have more chances of heart issues, gastrointestinal issues, kidney issues. So there's kind of a list of medical things that you're always looking for and that they're checking for. So I think you're always kind of on high alert. So, is there a correlation between Down syndrome and stillbirth? I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I would say that there are medical issues that could lead to that more frequently.
Right. Okay. And one of the last paragraphs you wrote, when a loved one dies, people always say, let me know if there's anything I can do. And you went on to write, in that moment, you didn't know what you needed, but now you have a better sense of what you needed then and what you need now.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I will never, you learn just so much about grief and what it's like to lose a loved one. I do feel like I'm like the grief expert in my circle of friends. But at the time, when you're getting those, let me know what we can do, I don't have the capacity to reach out to you and tell you what I need. So people that would just bring things, we had a lot of people who brought meals to the point where we were like, there's only 3 of us. There's no way we can eat
and
this
one's
much.
A toddler.
Yes, so we did a lot of freezing. So it was very helpful, but that was one thing that we look back that's funny. But even just to have my friends come and sit with me or talk with me. I was also recovering from a C-section, so I was not very mobile for those first few weeks, right? And because I didn't have a baby to come see, you're kind of alone. And I have a very lovely older sibling, a sister, who would not leave my side to the point where I was like, I think you can go home now. But I think about, she always remembers birthdays. She always remembers milestones. She's constantly bringing him up. And to have even one person who does that for me is so comforting and so lovely. And so I would say when you're experiencing grief, or if you know somebody who is, reach out. Don't give them the option. Go sit with them. Send them a funny card. Do something, right? It's way better than putting the burden on them to try to come up with something because we truly don't know. The second part of your question is when the playground came up, I did reach out to a lot of people and not in these words, but say, I didn't know what I needed then, but this is what I need now. Would you please consider contributing to build this playground in honor or as in memory of our son? And so I think that's something else to think about is that when you say, what can I do? We might come back and say, oh, here's what you can do. Right. I didn't know then, now I know.
Final thoughts, things that you want people to know.
Oh gosh.
I know that's a big open-ended question.
I mean, I think as a society we are much better about talking about miscarriage, better about talking about the structures, the issues around fertility, and I think that is amazing because I think the more we talk about these things, the more likely research, funding, answers we'll get. And I would just, you know, it's not comfortable for everybody to share their story. It has not been comfortable for me up until probably the last 6 months to really be able to talk openly about what happened to us and about our son. But I just would encourage people to share their stories and to just be aware of your actions and think about how, while your intentions are good, they might have the opposite effect. And so don't be afraid to connect with somebody who's going through something like this.
Right. Kara, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate your additional insight into uncomfortable topics that are super important. And to that end, if you go down to the text below this video, I'm going to include some links to the story with Kara about the playground. You can make a donation. There are links within that to do so. And then also more resources about stillbirth and pregnancy loss. So you can use those for your benefit and the benefit of those around you.